Hey, everybody. Welcome to the John Riley Project. I'm John Riley. I'm here with my special guest, Amit Asaravala. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you again.
Okay. Well, we love talking about Poway politics, Poway news, lots of going on in Poway. And Amit, you've been on the podcast once before. You're a local community leader here, president of the Poway Democratic Club. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, so I am a native Powegian. I would have been born in Poway, except there was no Pomerado Hospital back then. I went to local schools, went to Poway High School, moved away for a while, and moved back. So I'm back by choice, and have been the president of the Poway Democratic Club since I believe I don't know, I should have looked this up. 2019, I think.
Okay.
And over that time, we've seen a huge rise in Democrats in Poway and engagement, and we're here to represent the community and just make sure that Poway stays on track.
Well, this is great because the election was like 5-6 weeks ago, and there's just been a lot of chatter, a lot of social media commentary, a lot of changes that have happened since the election. And so one of the things that I really enjoyed when you joined me here a couple of years ago, is that we can have a calm, rational, civil conversation, unlike all the flame throwing that's going on in social media, So, and that's what I really appreciate that about you.
Yeah. Well, thanks. No, I appreciate the service that you're providing for the community. Right. I think, we've talked a bit about Poway and other small communities being news deserts. The chieftain doesn't really cover politics in depth. And this Union Tribune doesn't really cover Poway all that often. And so having, at least one outlet that takes a look at issues in depth, what's going on in Poway is, I think, a really valuable service. So.
Yeah, right on. Well, thanks. Yeah, that's kind of what we intended to do here. Okay, just a shout out to the audience. You can participate in this conversation. So if you have a question or a comment for Amit, for myself, or you just want to blow some steam and share your thoughts and comments and opinions, you can do so by typing in the live chat on Facebook, X, or YouTube, and we'll get you involved in the conversation. We'll bring up your text message, and we'll respond to your comments. So, there's a lot of places we could start, and I know the issue that kind of started this discussion of having the podcast episode was about District 1, right? So let's talk a little bit about District 1. That's Brian Pepin's seat, and he's been in office for a little over 2 terms, and he just resigned.
2 years, not even 1 term.
Excuse me, pardon me. 2 years, half a term.
That's right.
Yeah, that's shocking. Tell me about your thoughts on this whole thing with the resignation and Brian Pepin and et cetera.
Right. Yeah. Well, if I can maybe go one step broader than that, right? So this is coming right after an election where 2 district seats were basically turned over in an upset. Nobody saw these 2 newcomers coming in and winning in District 2 and District 4. We have Tony Blaine in District 2 and Jenny Maida in District 4. So right off the bat, that tells us that there's a change happening in Poway. Voter sentiment has I think finally reached a tipping point. There's been a lot of discussions of discontent and concern about the direction of city council over the years, especially underneath the Voss administration, if you want to call it that, and really since kind of like 2016, 2018, around there. So seeing these 2 seats go to newcomers who were not, chosen and endorsed by the establishment, not endorsed by Voss, was really a surprise to a lot of people. So then, shortly after the election, hearing that then Brian Pepin steps forward and says, "Oh, but I'm resigning as well to spend more time with my business, my political consulting business." I think that left Mayor Voss and the remaining city council members scrambling and maybe a bit scared. They're about to lose a majority, a long, held majority on city council. So that's sort of the context that we're in. Why are people upset about Brian Pepin stepping down after 2 years? I mean, I think people would love to feel like when someone is entrusted to be a public servant to sit on city council, they're there for the commitment of 4 years. to find somebody who steps down after 2 years, and not because there's a family emergency or they need to move for work or whatever, but simply because there's more money from his political consulting job, I think is disappointing to a lot of people in this community.
Yeah, it is. And I remember when Brian Pepin ran, we knew he had political aspirations, with his background in the local Republican Party and the Lincoln Club. But when he ran for office, he was like Mr. Poway guy, family guy, raising my family here. And it's weird that a person would be that invested in Poway and this seat and then hit the eject button after half a term.
Yeah, hard to say, kind of what's really going on there behind the scenes. But what this sets up is, of course, this question of how do we fill this gap on city council? And the city council has, in recent years, deferred to appointments constantly. This would be, I think, the fourth appointment under Voss himself, if they make an appointment.
Yeah, I mean, pull your microphone a little bit closer if you could.
Yeah,
there we go. Yeah, there have been a lot of appointments.
Right. And I think that also, worries a lot of people who are watching Poway politics and saying, okay, yet another appointment. There's 2 more years left on this term. So, the residents of District 1 voted for one representative. That representative is leaving. Why should they not have a say in who that replacement is for the next 2 years? Why should the city council, several members of the city council, get to decide who their representative is going to be? I can see and feel and hear that concern and that upset. And, sure enough, right before the last city council meeting, there were roughly 60 pages of emails sent to the city council.
60 pages?
Yeah, in 2 different batches from residents, throughout the city, that were almost all saying, we would like a special election. We want to pick our replacement representative. This is democracy. And at that city council meeting, the city council members dismissed that, almost within minutes, and said, no, we're going to appoint anyway. And so, here we are with yet another appointment process taking place.
Yeah, the history, what it was, Jim Cunningham was replaced by Kalen Frank, I think, right?
That's right. Yeah. I believe Voss originally appointed Barry Leonard. Voss and the city council members appointed Barry Leonard to fill in Voss's council seat.
Yes,
years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was almost a decade ago. And then, Kalen Frank, who had only lived here for 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
and that was controversial. A number of applicants who had been involved in city politics and had lived in Poway for years and had relationships were turned down for that. And then District 2, we had Anita Edmondson was chosen after Dave Grush stepped down as well recently. So this would be number 4.
There's some interesting storylines here with the appointment process. Like on one level, there is the how should I say, the pattern, right? And is this just coincidence that people seem to be resigning midterm, or is it a strategic calculation to continue an appointment process rather than a democratic vote? And that maybe some strings are being pulled for the timing, because when Brian Pepin resigned, it was just conveniently right after we had an election.
Yeah.
Imagine if we could have had the vote in November of 2024.
Right. Absolutely. And not only that, but, with Pepin's resignation, had it been just a little bit earlier, the city would have had to do a special election. But, he passed a certain threshold where it kind of goes up to, an option that the city council has is to appoint or do a special election. So, again, you kind of wonder, okay, well, was it timed to close out the requirement to do a special election, and to close off the fact that we already had ballots going out in November? Maybe we could have had that name on the ballot, or that race on the ballot. I think it's hard to know the intent of people behind the scenes, but I think it's how the city council reacts that matters, right? Do they react in a way that gives voters a say in their government and in their local government? And what we're seeing is no. We're seeing, at this most recent city council meeting, not a lot of great reasons provided as to why they immediately went to special election, other than, kind of Occam's razor tells you, as I said before, Voss and kind of the establishment representatives on council are seeing a chance that the majority could slip, could vanish if if you have Tony Blaine and Jenny Maida, who have kind of both publicly vowed to oppose a lot of what Voss and other city council members have put in place over the last few years, and then that a third seat maybe gets somebody else in office, we very well could see some serious changes.
I mean, that's mind blowing. I mean, since I've been in Poway since 1996, and there's been sort of a, they've called it like the old Poway Guard, or, there's like a certain group of leadership here that kind of each generation sort of follows the next with the same general philosophy and point of view on many, but not all things. So to see that Mayor Voss might be in a minority on the city council, I mean, that would be crazy.
Yeah.
In Poway terms.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a sign of just, the discontent among voters, like I said, has reached a tipping point. And, there was, right before the election, a leak of an audio recording of a, executive session of city council.
I heard that.
Which, I think this session may have taken place 2 years ago, but it was before really anybody in the city knew about the proposed Lifetime Fitness Center that was proposed for the farm. And, in this recording, it sounds like somebody at city staff just left the audio track or the video track on when they should have cut it off. When the city council went to executive session, that track should have been cut off, but it was still being broadcast. So it doesn't sound like this was a deliberate leak by some employee. This just sounds like
it's just a mistake.
But if you go and look at the transcript or you listen to the audio, I mean, you hear the city council being dismissive of residents. There's a quote from Mayor Voss saying, I don't give a shit about, and he names off a resident. I don't think people want to see their city council members, know that that's what the city council members are saying about them behind closed doors. I think that turned off the people who did hear that audio. I think it turned them off pretty immediately. And so that's just one in a long string of things that people have felt. It made them feel like the council is not operating in their best interest, is dismissive of them, maybe condescending, feels like they know best. And so, seeing another special election where the council's saying, yeah, we know best for, who should represent you. We'll take care of it. Listen to us, trust us. I think there's a lot of pushback on this.
It's interesting because first of all, do you like the whole idea of districts in Poway?
I do. I think, different parts of Poway, just like, any city or region, tend to have certain characteristics, right? People in North Poway just have, differences in where they shop, the direction that they leave town, right? A lot of people go to Rancho Bernardo, right? And that's where they do their business versus South Poway, So I do think that the grouping people together in that way and giving them a chance to advocate for their region is not a bad thing. And I think that, you can, unfortunately, like if you don't have those districts, you can dilute minority voters pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
Not that Poway has a very large, sizable minority, but it, I think districts is the right direction for us to be moving in. It was the right decision to be in.
Yeah, I agree. And it seems like that there were, let's just say, racial identity groups that were part of the idea for having the district, creation, and that was the legal battle. But yeah, not as challenging here in Poway on that point. But it is interesting that the whole idea of having a council, a district, and having your own representative is that the people vote for that person. But wouldn't it be odd that if the other 4 city council members, none of which lived in District 1, were the ones choosing the representative for District 1?
Right. So, I mentioned at this most recent city council meeting, there was some explanations put out there for why the city council was going towards appointment, but to my ears, none of them felt genuine or logical, right? I mean, I think one of them being, well, a special a mail-in special election. This was actually not said at the city council meeting, but through subsequent emails, Mayor Voss responded to some people who wrote in saying, why are we so quick to dismiss a mail-in election ballot election? And Mayor Voss' response was, well, that can disenfranchise some voters. Well, doesn't 4 city council members who don't live in District 1 deciding who their representative disenfranchise all of District 1?
Right. Yeah.
There was some concern, I think, about, well, if we wait until we can have a special election, it might be, I think I've heard May for a mail-in election and November for an actual, on the ballot election. Doesn't that leave District 1 without representation for that time? Well, Councilmember Pepin said in his resignation letter, I will stay until a replacement has been selected. So that's not necessarily an issue, unless he's saying, look, guys, I'm not staying until November. So there are kind of these vague reasons put out there for why an appointment was the only, best solution for them. But it doesn't sound like any of those are really genuine reasons.
Yeah. There's again, a lot of different angles to this, because I saw how Mayor Voss, he just said it was a mail-in vote was a non-starter.
Right.
And I was wondering is that because he opposed the vote, or because he opposes mail-in, which is obviously a sensitive political issue for some people, So, I mean, what was your sense there?
Well, I actually sent in an email asking him if he could explain that, and other people have as well, and he did respond, to at least one person who shared the comments with me, and that's and Mayor Voss was saying he thought that a mail-in would not allow all voters to vote, and I don't exactly know what that means. I don't know why, given that in the state of California, the majority of people vote by mail-in ballot at this point and have for a number of years. So it's not like it's unusual to voters in California. There were very few people who actually went into a vote center in this last election. Pretty much everybody, voted by mail. So yeah, hard to say exactly what the real reason is there. But that's what I'm hearing back.
Well, why can't they do a regular vote is there a primary election in March? Is that just too short of a window? I mean, I don't understand why they can't do that.
Well, there's not going to be a primary this year. I mean, there would be in 2026 for like the gubernatorial election.
Okay, that's right, because it's an odd year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there are certain rules around, like, to do a special election, you have to have 120 days from the time that you announce it, for candidates to run and for the voter registrar to get everything set up. And, so there is some factors that would limit the amount of time that you have, or extend the amount of time that you have until that actually happens. And, and again, maybe that's weighing on their minds. I know cost has been brought up. I will say, when it was Pete Babich, the former president of the Poway Democratic Club, who brought up at the city council meeting the idea of a mail-in election being cheaper than an actual, in-person polling station election. And when the council members asked the city attorney, "Oh, what would that cost?" The city attorney, kind of gave an anecdotal response, saying, "Oh, it'd be $100,000 to $200,000, something like that." I'm paraphrasing, based on their observation of Del Mar. But this is, kind of one anecdotal data point, not any sort of actual, factual review or analysis of what the cost actually would be. And so, for the city council to make a quick decision just based on that seems to me like our city council members aren't pushing the staff to give them the full set of facts and not taking the time to actually consider all the different issues that are involved here.
Yeah. Well, I'll just, to be straight, I am an advocate of having a vote, and that's my opinion. Even if it costs a couple $100,000,
yeah,
that's like, I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but it's like less than 1% of the city's total budget.
Yeah,
I mean, you think that they could maybe deprioritize some lower priority, and kind of move the money into the pot for the election.
I mean, the city council and the city has done a good job of maintaining reserves. They've received kudos for that. This would be a chance to use some of those reserves for democracy, right? Democracy costs money. If we were always concerned about the cost of elections, we just wouldn't have elections, right? We would just say, yeah, it's a lot easier if I pick for you and I know best, right? My previous picks, as Voss said, have all done great. They've done admirably. So why wouldn't we just continue choosing people? I mean, as soon as you hear that said out loud, it starts to sound pretty silly. I mean, we should have a special election in order for democracy to be allowed to work.
That's kind of the whole point of local government, isn't it?
Right.
Just to have like local representation.
Right.
There was a piece of news that broke today
Right.
about the appointment of application window. Can you break that down for us?
Right. So, as I've said, at the city council meeting, city council members decided very quickly that they were not going to do a special election. They were going to appoint. They very quickly after that city council meeting decided that appointment window was going to be incredibly short. In fact, it was going to get pushed through the day before the two new city council members were sworn in on December 17th.
Okay.
I mean, so basically Pepin announces or, submits his resignation right before Thanksgiving. So not a lot of business days between that and the city council meeting where they decide to appoint. I think it was only about three business days. And then not a lot of business days from there to the time that the city council says, hey, get your applications in. You got about a week. Hey, you better decide if you want to commit to city council for 2 years for District 1 and put together this great application and come in and interview with us. And, we're going to make this selection. So number of members of the city, number of residents have, been writing in. I don't, assume they've been calling. They, been basically just pushing back and insisting that there be, ideally not an appointment process. But if there's going to be an appointment process, there's got to be more time for candidates to actually step forward and put together, a proper application. And then the other thing that people are pushing for, which I'm really a big fan of here, is consistency with the last appointment that they did. So when they appointed Anita Edmondson, which I believe was like last year, to District 2, they required all applicants to sign a statement saying they would not run for election in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So basically it'd be an open seat. So, it's kind of like an olive branch, if you will, to voters saying, okay, yes, we're going to pick your appointment to keep, the process is moving along here in city government, but we understand that appointing somebody creates this sort of power of incumbency, makes it hard for challengers to win then in the election, especially in a news desert like Poway.
Mm-hmm.
So to try to mitigate that somewhat, we'll say that appointee won't run for election. It'll be an open seat. We have to do that again. If they're going to appoint here, they need to do that again. I have not heard a word about them. They didn't discuss that at the city council meeting, but that needs to happen. And so, I think residents are pushing for that and are asking for that. And I really hope that more people, out there listening do push for that.
It's interesting. Just in social media, I can sense a lot more people that aren't the usual names and faces that we see in Poway commenting on local politics. On Nextdoor, especially, it's a whole other audience of people that are commenting on this. And it does seem to be a bit of a groundswell kind of building in terms of, the general change in opinion on city council and this effort to have a vote.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mentioned that like 60 pages of emails, I read through those. And sure, there were a few names I recognize, people from Poway Democratic Club, people, from the South and North Poway Votes Facebook group that tends to be very active. And then there were a whole bunch of names that, members of the community who are getting involved, who, like I said, are starting to notice that, hey, this Amazon warehouse showed up on the ridgeline, in Garden Road and is there now forever. That's their view out their front door. And there was never any sort of apology. There was never any sort of accountability for that happening. There's never any sort of attempt to, hide or cover that wall of that building by the city council, and that has upset a lot of people. The lifetime thing that we talked about, right? I mean, the city council was all in favor of this. Never really any sort of attempt to include voters in what's happening in their city. And, they're seeing this on Poway Road with buildings coming up. Not that they're opposed to the apartments or the buildings. It's the way that they're coming up, the way that they're going against things that were in the specific plan and the way they were supposed to be built that would have created this nice walkable community feel. So I just think more and more people are seeing it. It's visible now, right?
Yeah, that's that. I mean, Poway Road is very visible, with all the development, and people are like freaking out. Traffic, congestion. The view has changed. Just changing the whole character of South Poway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there are ways to do development. You look at like Midland Road and Old Poway, and I think people tend to enjoy that, right? They like the look of it. Has kind of almost an old West sort of a style to it, right? It's uniform, just parking on the street, but there's also places to sit outside. And I think, people would like to feel that their downtown has that sort of there. And as soon as you start making exceptions for developers to build, extra floors and build with just a 5-foot setback of the sidewalk, no place to, to sit or to feel comfortable walking, you start changing the character of what people really wanted out of their downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, clearly, as we're seeing, it's not what residents want. And they're showing up to vote against that and saying, I'm going to put in place city council members that hopefully will recognize my opinion a little bit more and represent me a bit better.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of get that general vibe as well. I mean, it showed up on election day for sure.
Right.
And just, just the general energy, when you're around town talking to friends on social media, something changed in Poway. I want to talk about, the District 4 race with Jenny Maeda and Kaylin Frank, as well as District 2. But is there anything more we need to talk about with District 1 and the appointment versus the election?
Well, only that, to those who are out there, listening to the podcast, I mean, those of you who have written in, I'm going to get a little bit partisan here and just say, like, I think it's great that residents are getting involved. I think it's great that there were so many letters written in to city council. It's a little bit too bad that those letters were dismissed so quickly, but, maybe we're starting to see some of that pressure working, right? The fact that the city council did come back and say, okay, we're going to extend the application into January. Sorry, and give people a little bit more time to actually apply for this. Maybe that's a sign that pressure and that voice of the community is starting to be heard. And so I would just encourage residents to continue, making their voices heard and not be discouraged, not back off.
Yeah. I mean, that's the great thing about living in a small community is your voice carries a lot more weight, right?
Yeah.
You can have a little bit of influence locally. And if people have a problem or they like something or don't like something, people need to speak up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's shift gears. We just did District 1. Let's just go in order. We'll go District 2 next.
Okay.
And that's the election of Tony Blaine to replace the seat that's temporarily occupied by Anita Edmondson. This was a very interesting election, a 3-way race, and no one really knew who was going to win. And Tony, to some degree, I think shocked a lot of people in winning this race.
I think so. I think, so Jared Wilson, president of the San Diego Police Officers Association, very large PAC in San Diego, police officer himself, running in a majority Republican district of Poway. You would seem, right, that you would think that he was the front runner and a shoo-in. He was endorsed by the city council members, friend of Brian Pepin, GOP endorsed him, and he came in last. He came in last by quite a bit, and that was definitely a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, it's a sign of this kind of discontent with city politics, to the fact that extends even into the heaviest Republican district of Poway. Now, we should maybe do an aside here. We kind of tend to think about Poway or even District 2 as heavily Republican, but the truth is that, there is no one group in Poway that has the majority. It's and I think in District 2, it's like 30, maybe 37% Republican
Mhm.
and like 33 point something percent Democrat, and the rest are other. Declined to state. So these are very close. It's a third, a third, a third. Give or take a few percentage
Sure.
points. So I think that is kind of how the results played out. I think we saw probably a lot of no party preference voters who saw Tony Blaine's signs all down Spola Road and in major thoroughfares in District 2 and met with him. To his credit, he knocked on, I think, every single door in his district that he could find. I mean, he went out there walking.
Wow. That's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And,
Yeah.
and to his credit, he had a good ground game, and I will give him that for sure. The sign game was very good too. And I think a lot of people who maybe didn't know anything about what was going on in the district race saw the signs, and maybe the name recognition helped him when it came time to vote. So that's Tony, and I think that all worked out in his favor. And Vanessa Springett, who we should mention, came in second place, not that far behind Tony. And Vanessa, no party preference voter. The Poway Democratic Club did end up supporting her. We kind of weighed our options, and a lot of her values aligned with ours, and just kind of the way that she discussed approaching Poway politics, and just kind of this very measured, thoughtful approach, really nonpartisan, not coming in with ideology, not throwing bombs left and right, but just kind of saying, hey, look, yeah, there are changes that need to be made. We can't just kind of let developers have everything they want without any sort of thought paid to what is the benefit to the community at large?
Mhm.
Who does this hurt? What is the long-term impact to the city? So we ended up supporting her, and she came in very close. And I think if she had been able to run a little bit sooner, she came in, I think, on the last day of the filing deadline, and still managed to get, a close second place. Tony Blaine ran for almost 2 years straight. I mean, I think after the last election was out there on Nextdoor, pretty much running a social media campaign saying, I am running.
I remember he announced his candidacy in, it was in August or September of 2022,
Right.
like before.
Was it before?
Yeah, like it was like a cycle in advance. I had never seen that before.
Yeah. And maybe that worked in his favor. I think with Tony, I'll say this, right? He has come out very strong. He has, I think, kind of more recently has put out a lot of things out on social media saying, hey, we're going to recall this council member, or I'm calling for the resignation of the city attorney and the city manager. I hope that he doesn't end up getting siloed, right? He is 1 vote out of 5 on the city council. I hope that he is able to find enough common ground. Not that he has to agree with all the other council members, because the independence is, I think, what people were attracted to. But where can he find common ground? Where can he make some friends and allies so that he can get some of his ideas through, right? Because otherwise he's going to be in a silo, and I worry that that's just going to be throwing away everything that he worked hard for and everything that people elected him for.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's been a lot of chatter about Tony, and I met him once. It was just a greeting, a handshake. It was at one of those meetings when Lifetime Fitness was presenting their plan. They had one up at a church here off of Espola. I went to that, and I got a chance to meet him there. It was very friendly, but yeah, like he's pretty aggressive on social media, and I think there's a lot of people that are concerned what his not necessarily how he's going to vote, but also kind of the brashness of how he kind of conducts his business. So I think we're going to find out, once he's sworn in. That'll be pretty soon, won't it?
Yeah. I believe it's the 17th of December that they get sworn in. So
wow. Yeah. And today's the 10th, right? It's
next week.
Next week.
Yeah.
Okay. This is amazing. So I think the other angle to that race in District 2 was that it was a 3-way race, so it's hard to see how it was going to split. And I think that the anti Lifetime vote was split in half. you know,
Mhm.
between Springett and Blaine.
Right. Right.
And I think, you know, that's how they ended up getting a plurality kind of a situation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's how like Tony was able to kind of sneak through.
Yeah, I think there's probably some truth to that. I think Jared Wilson also did not find a way to stand out as a candidate. I went to that, the town hall that the Chamber of Commerce puts on for every election, and he ran on kind of the common things, right? Safety, which you expect from, I think, pretty much any candidate. There's not a lot of candidates who come out there and say that's my lowest priority.
Well, he's a police guy.
He's a police officer.
Yeah.
One of the things that stood out to me, because it was just kind of the only unique idea that I heard, was, he said, I want to allow people to swim in Lake Poway.
Really?
He did. And, I kind of chuckled at that. I don't remember anybody asking for that. I don't remember that being a city priority among people that I've spoken to. So I think he just had a hard time getting traction, as a candidate, and that left open that space for Tony Blaine and Vanessa Springett to define themselves.
Yeah.
And like you said, they defined themselves. Vanessa in particular defined herself with no on H.
Yeah.
I mean, and she was, prior to running, was a big advocate of pushing back on that proposal, and I think that kind of helped her decide to run for city council. I think Tony Blaine kind of came on to No on H later, at least in my impression of it, and kind of saw that as something that he wanted to be a part of. But I think it resonated, right? It resonated with voters in the area who are seeing the effects of the development and the farm, and they're just seeing that it's not what they had voted for 4 years ago.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, people are very upset about this because it wasn't what they voted for. I get it. Now, there's one thing though about Tony Blaine I think is very interesting, and one thing that I like about him is that he's a proponent of term limits. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on term limits in Poway. How would that be a good thing?
Yeah, I think term limits are definitely a good thing. Especially, I know I'm beating a dead horse here by coming back to like the information desert, but when you have kind of low information about elections, people tend to gravitate towards the incumbents, right? The names that they've seen before. And if they've seen a name, constantly, coming up on social media or on in the chieftain or wherever, because that is their, elected representatives, they're just going to gravitate towards voting for that person again. And so, you kind of have a danger of locking in incumbents for a very long time, unless they decide that they want to go spend time with their business, their political consulting business, right? And so, yeah, a term limit would help create some turnover there, and it kind of forces people to be deliberate about their time in office and say, okay, if my term limit is two terms or 3 terms, whatever it wants to be, I got to work with others. I got to get done what I want to get done here. And I can't just start to relax and get complacent and just assume that I'm going to keep getting reelected over and over easily. Right.
Yeah. Usually incumbents win like 90% or more of the time, right?
I don't have the exact numbers on that, but I would not be surprised.
Yeah. Especially as districts are gerrymandered and, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a proponent for it as well. And it's kind of consistent with what our founding fathers thought of is you serve your time and you go back home, and then you kind of go back to your family and work in your business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Tony did start trying to get that petition out there so he could get term limits on the ballot. While he was running, I think, his campaign, he tried to get signatures put together. Then he, was deployed for a while as a reservist. It's kind of question in there, about like, should he have planned that differently? And the timing of that, should that have been better and worked out better? But, if he's on city council and he decides that that's another, an issue that he wants to continue to drive forward, I think you probably get a lot of support from residents out there.
You know what I appreciate about you, Amit, is that your responses are so measured, and just very calm, rational, civil. You're not throwing bombs.
Sure.
We're just talking about the issues. And I love that.
Sure. Well, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good thing, isn't it? Just to have a kind of a nice conversation. Hey, just a shout out to the audience. I just want to let you all know that, you're welcome to join us in this conversation. So if you got a question or a comment for Amit, for myself, if you just want to blow some steam and you want to share your thoughts on the election here in Poway, just type it in the live chat on Facebook, on YouTube, or on X. And we've already got a couple of people that have come in. Like Mike Devine was here. He says, "Hi, John, how you doing?" And Pete Neal says, "Pete's here." And Pete was also saying, yeah, the 69% no on H.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Hey, Pete. Hey, everybody.
That was overwhelming.
It was overwhelming. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially given the amount of money that Lifetime put into either a campaign here. I think maybe don't quote me on this, but I think it was like $175,000 or something, upwards of.
I thought it was more than that.
Was it? I mean, the Poway Democratic Club considered Measure H, as we do any measure on the Poway ballot. And, Lifetime, we contacted them, said, "Hey, would you like to, do you have a representative that wants to come out and talk to us and answer our questions as we consider this measure?" And they flew out Steph Griffin, the senior vice president, in charge of the project, from Minnesota, flew out that night, I think, that day, and then left the very next morning. They were willing to spend the time and the money to make sure that Poway knew about what was going on, but they failed to make a strong case for how this was a benefit to the community at large. There was not really a strong tax case. Gym memberships are not taxed. Right. This is not really a huge tax case. Not enough of employees and hiring. For the site here. There was a whole bunch of shenanigans around the traffic study and how much traffic this Lifetime Fitness Center was actually going to bring in to the area. And a lot of questions about the cost, right? And who was actually going to be the clientele? Was it really going to be Poway citizens, being able to afford this high monthly fee for this luxury gym?
Definitely. Yeah.
Or were they going to bring in people who don't want to go down to the La Jolla gym and, maybe live in North County, and are going to be driving in off of the freeway, 10, 15 minutes off the freeway, down to Spola and up through a neighborhood to get to their lifestyle gym. And so I think that, that brought up a lot of concerns. And what's surprising to me about the 69% opposed to Measure H is that I don't think anybody expected, I think we expected District 2 residents to strongly oppose it.
Mm-hmm.
But we thought that might get diluted by the rest of the Poway, who maybe didn't hear as much about it, didn't know about it, or thought, okay, well, whatever, that's up there. That's not where I am. And so, sure, let them have a fancy gym up there. There's a bunch of expensive houses up there anyway, right? That's the biggest surprise, is that, almost 70% of all of Poway did not want this thing. Right. I mean, the word got out there. And again, I think this goes back to just kind of these strong, the stronger voice of residents, and it's getting heard out there. There were a number of different organizations opposing this that were working, not necessarily collaboratively, but, it was a loose coalition of organizations and citizen groups that were opposed to Measure H. And they were all communicating with their members and constituents, and in a way that I haven't seen before, in Poway, to oppose a measure.
Yeah, it was very organized.
Yeah.
And my sense was that there were people that were upset that there was a change in the plan after there was a promise that there would be no change.
Right.
I think other people were concerned with the size and scope of the facility and traffic and all the things you brought up. My instinct also is that there are people that are just generally unhappy with all the development everywhere in Poway. And this is a chance where they can vote no on something.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And I do sometimes, when I hear people say no to some new development, I do have to, ask that, say, okay, well, what is it about this that you're really concerned about? And, the number one thing you always get is like traffic, right? Any new development is going to bring in traffic, and nobody, welcomes a lot more traffic. Nobody wants to spend more time getting down Poway Road. But when you dig into it, or at least when I dig into it, with like Poway Democratic Club members or just people I talk to out in the community, you start to, uncover that's not really an opposition to all development. And I think I mentioned this earlier, like Poway Road, it's not that people are opposed to apartment buildings. I think there's actually a general recognition that like housing in California is outrageously expensive, and the only way out of this is that we're going to have to build more housing, and of all levels, not just luxury homes, but we're going to have to build apartments. We're going to have to build condos. And I think when you talk to people about that and you say, hey, are you concerned about like your kids, right? If your kids are in college or going off to college soon, are you worried about what's going to happen to them when they leave college, and where are they going to live? Are they going to be able to afford an apartment on their salary? I think most people agree that like, okay, I get it. There needs to be housing, there needs to be development. But what they're opposed to, at least in Poway, is the way that, over the last, I'd say 8 to 10 years, the development has almost always been a, kind of a giveaway to the developers. It's almost always been, yeah, we really had this beautiful vision of what Poway Road was supposed to be. And we had all these community members come together and create this Poway Road specific plan together, of all backgrounds. But you know what? We're very easily going to give you a conditional use permit or, a change to that plan. So you can now, forget the idea of having, businesses on the bottom level and seating outside and in a very large setback. Forget that. You go ahead, do what you want to do. We had this vision of the farm where, yeah, there were going to be small local businesses, right? And they even lined up these small local businesses. We had names. Floaty Swim School was going to come in. Forward Gym was going to come in, run by my locals, in kind of a resilient way, right? When you have small businesses, if one small business goes out of business, it's easier to fill in than a 30,000 square foot gargantuan building, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what people liked. That's what people wanted. And so as soon as that is what got changed out, swapped out on them, that's what they really opposed is, wait a minute, like this is not really a benefit to anybody but the developer who's going to, and the landowner who's going to make a whole lot of money here.
And the customers that will enjoy it.
Yeah, you hope so, right?
Yeah,
you would want, if that were to have passed, right? We definitely would have wanted that to be a success because again, if in 5 years they're not able to continue that business, we're left with a 30,000 square foot building on a 60,000 square foot of outbuildings and whatever empty, and it's really hard to fill that in a way that filling a small local gym is a lot easier.
Right. Definitely. Yeah.
So,
yeah. So yeah, it is interesting. And Pete, thanks for bringing that up. 69% no on H. So again, we're trying to get everyone involved here. John Carson commented. He said Anita was appointed to replace an appointed Barry Leonard, not Dave Grush.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's right. Yep. I think I got those mixed up. But
yeah.
You're right.
There have been so many.
I know.
And they're easily swapped around.
Right.
It's like a shell game.
Yeah.
And then who do we got here? Mike Devine saying, working out, I will comment when done. Okay. Yeah. We're doing the live stream now, but we'll post this on YouTube. I'm going to break this into segments so you don't have to listen or watch the whole thing. You can just pick out the pieces you want. Want to talk about District 4?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. District 4. This was a crazy one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Let me bring up the graphic for that. And Jenny Maeda beats Kaylin Frank by 12 votes.
Yeah. Yeah. That is amazing, right? I don't know if there was a closer race in the county of San Diego this year. That we were all watching that. And initially, right? To those of, who don't follow the vote results and tallies as closely as, you and I do, right? It started out with Kaylin Frank, the incumbent, in the lead. And that's I think what was expected, right? People thought, okay, she well outspent Jenny Maeda. Jenny Maeda is a political newcomer. I think she is, one of those kind of reluctant candidates, those people from the community who says, okay, I'm going to step up because I see that this is a seat that is unchallenged, and I'm upset with the way city council's been going, and I hear the residents and my neighbors, who are upset, and I'm going to be that person who sacrifices my time to be the representative, or to at least run. I may not win, but I'm going to run just so there's a challenge, and we can at least have a debate during the election about issues in Poway. So, thanks to Jenny Maeda for being that person and wanting to do that. I respect candidates that do that. Delta Sparza ran for mayor 2 years ago, right? Again, it was a very similar situation where she said, okay, nobody's running against Mayor Voss, and somebody needs to run. She wasn't necessarily, orienting her whole, like time and commitments towards being the mayor. She was kind of a reluctant candidate. And in doing so, allowed there to be this debate and discussion throughout the election, and kind of forced the other candidate to have to spend money explaining themselves and sending out mailers. And so that's what Jenny Maida did. And thanks to her for doing that. As the returns started coming in, we started to see Caitlin Frank's lead slip.
It was amazing.
and with each batch of returns that got counted, Jenny Maida came and then overtook. I think it was by 13 votes at some point.
Yeah.
And everyone was questioning, is this going to hold? Is this going to hold? And I've got to believe that Caitlin Frank and the GOP, the county GOP, was doing what's called ballot curing behind the scenes. So, for those who aren't aware, there are a handful of ballots, in every election where people forgot to sign their ballot, or they didn't date it right, or there was some other issue where the county can't count that ballot. And so the voter registrar tries to reach out to those voters and say, hey, you have a week or so, whatever it is, to cure your ballot. Well, in close races, county parties try to get involved, and they can get a list of ballots that need to be cured, and they can drill down and go, okay, here's all the ballots that need to be cured in District 4. And of those ballots, of those names, these are all Republicans. So they also reach out to those Republicans and say, hey, your ballot didn't get counted. Can you please follow up on this? Don't ignore that call from the voter registrar and get that ballot in. And you can bet that they were doing that to try to get that 12, 13 votes, find that difference. And they didn't. And so, that to me is just, an amazing story, and a real surprise, I think, to everybody, who follows politics in Poway.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think what Jenny did is very, it's like that Teddy Roosevelt quote. You get in the arena with the sweat and the dirt, and you go in and you fight the battle because no one else was willing to fight the battle against the incumbent. And again, my sense was there are people that were angry about what's going on in District 4 along Poway Road, and and there's people that had legitimate gripes about Caitlin Frank, but I think there were people that were just upset with the status quo. And they wanted a newbie. They wanted a green candidate. Green meaning a newbie, not a environmentalist necessarily. Right. But it to me, this is fascinating. Have you ever seen an election get this close?
I don't know if I've seen an election finish this close. I remember in the county supervisor race with Mayor Voss and Joel Anderson, there was a period there where the returns were coming in where they were within, a dozen votes or something like that, or maybe under 100. And everyone was, kind of watching this saying, what is going to happen here? And, Joel Anderson in the end ended up winning and beating Mayor Voss, but it was a very close race.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like less than 1/10 of 1%. I think it was crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I do want to say, so about Jenny Maida, right? I think as a newcomer, as she, she's a registered Republican, but essentially is coming in as an independent, similar to Tony Blaine, right? He's a registered Republican, but, not coming out saying I'm part of the GOP establishment, right? They're not involved, they weren't on central committee. They weren't part of these big PACs like the San Diego Police Officers Association or the Lincoln Club like Brian Pepin. And so I think people, saw that and saw an independent in a way and thought, okay, here's somebody who's going to hopefully be on council and be an independent voice. Now, I'm sure that a lot of people are probably calling Jenny Maida right now and trying to influence her thinking, right?
Oh, of course.
I'm sure that, council members, former council members, incoming council members, leaders
business
in the community.
Interests.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
Lots of people.
Right. Or saying, here's a blank slate as far as they can see. I mean, maybe Jenny's got her own plan, but they're saying, how can I, maybe under the guise of like mentorship or, whatever it is, kind of guide this council member, whatever direction they want. So, my hope there for District 4 would be that, Jenny, obviously you want to talk to people, you want to talk to different constituents, different, interested parties, absorb as much information as possible, but ultimately find a way to maintain that independence, right? Ultimately make sure that the decisions that you're making on council are sort of genuine and true to who you are and what you ran, why you ran, and the residents that you're representing and what they really want and what's best for Poway. I would hate to see, this kind of hope of independence end up, getting co-opted by other people out there who are trying to guide her to one direction or another.
Well, on a political level, it's funny because we always think of everything's red or blue, but there are a tremendous amount of independents, in some cases, maybe more than red or blue. And it's nice to have an independent candidate actually win.
Yeah.
And I think it's refreshing. It's harder to do when you get into partisan races, but at the city level, I think it's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think I talked about District 2 being split up, but I think Poway as a whole is even closer. Is like almost, there's only like 1,000 voter registration difference between Republicans and Democrats, with Republicans in the lead, slight lead. But there's a big number of just other voters out there. I mean, so you really can look at Poway as a third, Democrat, Republican, and then just other, which is mostly no party preference, independents. But, there are some handful of libertarians and Green Party candidates. Mm-hmm. And, there's even like the American Independent Party, which I think people accidentally sign up for. Yeah. That's a whole nother story.
Yeah, so. That's right.
Yeah. But, Poway is a really interesting mix of ideas and voters. And so it's nice to see, hopefully, fingers crossed, a city council that is starting to represent that more.
Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of the whole point of local representation too.
Yeah.
And I think some people might get, they have the perception of Poway being a country town, being kind of a red zone for so long. And then people drive by Twin Peaks and Pomerado with all the Trump supporters. Mm-hmm. People may not realize that Poway, to your point, is a third.
Yeah. I mean, the Trump supporters on the corner kind of took over from a more liberal group that had been there, for quite a while longer. And I think at some point that liberal group kind of said, this is a little bit too crazy. We don't want all this conflict on the corner. And they've moved on and they may meet on Poway Road now. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure about that, but but I think that like that display on that corner of Twin Peaks skews people's vision of Poway for sure when they come into town to shop at Target or the Amazon Fresh or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, well, it's the new store in town. That's the excitement in Poway. Right. I remember originally, to your point, a more liberal group. I think it was the local Democrats were there in the George W. Bush era, and they were against the Iraq War. Mm. And I think that's the first time I saw them. And they were just on that one corner by Jersey Mike's. Yeah. And then it turned into a circus 2 or 3 election cycles ago. And I mean, there was violence.
Yeah.
And that was really sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm all for, people exercising their First Amendment rights, but, obviously you want to see that happen without violence and without conflict and see that people do that peacefully. And, it's too bad that it ended up becoming a situation where, liberal voices did not feel safe anymore on that corner.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole thing is just, it's like a theater when you go through there. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah. Sometimes I feel like taking my podcast and putting a table out there and then kind of inviting a community forum. That would be kind of fun. Have you gotten any word if there's going to be a recount for the District 4 race?
So it's my understanding that Caitlin Frank has conceded at this point, and Jenny Maida has been, invited by the city to be sworn in next Tuesday. I think that if there was going to be a recount, Caitlin Frank would have to pay for that out of her own pocket, and that may not be something that she wants to do. I don't know her thinking. Yeah.
Okay. And then going back to this curation process that you talked about. There are conspiracy theorists in California. They're certain that the ballots are being manipulated, yada, yada. And the fact that it takes so long to count the ballots in California, is this why the curation issue?
I should have probably looked into that a little bit more, to be honest, like kind of what the issues are with California and why it takes so long. But, we do give I think voter registrars give like anywhere from a week to 10 days or something like that to key your ballots. So that does have to factor in.
Mhm.
I think the mail-in ballot process plus the vote centers that we have now, at least in San Diego County, just kind of all require things to be counted, as they come in or after they come in. And so you're still getting votes, mailed in, could be days after the actual election happens. So it's not like there's just an election, we scan all the ballots and we've got a number. There's kind of tranches of ballots that have to be sorted through. And, I think doing it right takes time. And I appreciate that they do it right.
I think people have this vision that it should be like when we took those Scantron tests, with the number 2 pencil, and
Right.
and they could just run them through an automated machine and get a number right away.
Yeah.
But it's not that way.
Especially not if they're, having to look at, signatures, especially on the mail-in ballots, right? You have to look at signatures. You got to look at dates. You have to see if those signatures match up with the signature that was provided when that person registered to vote.
My daughter's ballot was rejected on a
Okay.
signature check, and it was because when she was 18, she had this perfect signature, and I guess when she filled out her ballot, a little bit more messy, and they looked at the
Right.
two and they said, "Sorry, it
Mhm.
doesn't count."
Yeah.
So they do check that.
Yeah. Which, I think to kind of address like conspiracy theorists, I mean, there's a lot more in the way of checks and balances than kind of what is put out there on social media or whatever, where people say, oh, anybody's turning in ballots and dead people are turning in ballots and that person's dog turned in a ballot. It's really much more controlled than that.
Remember the hanging chads?
Oh yeah.
That was like about 24 years ago. That was something.
Yeah. I was actually describing that to my kids recently, before the election. And, the fact that, have we really come a long way since then or not? I mean, we've maybe solved the hanging chad problem, but we are, we're no more advanced technologically in our voting than we were back then.
And it seems like people want to go back to paper ballots. It's not like we all want to go old school now, because there's a certain amount of distrust in the system. But, my experience, I ran for office 10 years ago.
Right.
The people that register our voters are terrific. They really help you out, build a lot of comments. I had no question about, their integrity. What else? What other thoughts do you have on Poway?
Well, I think, this idea that there's a change taking place is kind of the most kind of the one that resonates with me, right? I mean, the takeaway from the election, the takeaway from the response to the District 1, kind of appointment question, and the community feedback. I love seeing it, right? I love seeing people get involved. I was disappointed to hear, I believe it was Councilmember DeHoff at the last, council meeting, kind of dismiss some of that, as a social media campaign to send in letters. Well, sure. I mean, how this is the modern era. I mean, how else are there campaigns to get out the vote and to organize? It doesn't really matter where these letters came from, other than the fact that these are your citizens. These are the people that you're representing. And I think that there's sort of this distance between a lot of the council members and the residents that they were supposed to be representing. That's gotten, I don't know why, that has kind of appeared. And so, I hope that the newcomers can help change some of that and bring this back to more direct representation and feel like community members are actually getting heard and their interests are actually being represented. Yeah.
There's more people. I'm listening to you and paying attention, but I'm also watching the screen because we're getting a lot of comments in here. And so I'm going to get some of these folks involved here. Mike Devine always has something strong to say. He goes, the good thing about parties is where the council person stands. Without parties, anything could happen. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. People in parties flip around quite a bit, don't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we maybe, because we see so much about the national election cycles, right? And we hear about, Republicans versus Democrats and kind of the big ticket issues that are litmus tests, essentially, for these parties. You kind of get that vision in your head that that's, a Republican or a Democrat on city council is going to come in with this ideology. But the truth is that, local politics are much more varied. I mean, we're not up, they're not up there talking about, abortion issues, right? On the city council, usually, we're talking about things like zoning issues, right? And talking about, whether or not this business should have a conditional use permit, and whether or not a battery storage facility should go in, back in a canyon, right? And so that's much harder to have like an ideology coming into a question like that. There's not really a playbook on that. So that's, in a way that's nice, right? About local elections.
Yeah.
People have to think independently. What you ideally hope for is that people are being thoughtful and judicious and kind of trying to get all the facts before they make decisions. So, character and the way you approach things becomes much more important than I think your ideology sometimes, and your party. And so,
at the local level, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
They're your neighbors, they're your friends.
Yeah. And, when a question is placed before you on city council, do you ask the staff for more details and more information? Do you ask the right questions? A question, I think I mentioned this earlier, a question was asked of the city attorney, at the last city council meeting, what was the cost of a mail-in election? And, there was kind of an anecdotal response, but that, I think a good city council members would be pushing for more, saying, okay, well, that's anecdotal. Can I have facts? Can you go back and do an analysis and then come back and let's consider this with an actual, set of facts about what these things cost. And so that would be my hope moving forward, is that the city council does that more and more.
The classic example I can think of locally where party alignment and local issues didn't match up at all was when TJ Zane was on the Poway Unified School Board.
Yeah.
And, one of the Republican leaders in the county, and yet he was endorsed by the teachers union.
Yeah. Yeah. And the teachers union endorsed Cindy Seitzma in this last election as well. School board member in Area E, and she lost. And it's a race that we didn't talk about, but it affects Poway. It's Poway Unified School District. Area E comes into Poway, and our endorsed Democrat David Chang won there, and that was a 3-party race as well, with Craig Pond and Cindy Seitzma. But as an incumbent, Cindy Seitzma, with the endorsement of the teachers union, came in last, which again was another kind of surprise.
Yeah, I was surprised by that as well. So, I interviewed her when she ran the first time, I guess in 2020. Yeah, because it was during COVID. And it was just odd for an incumbent, not to necessarily just lose, but to come in last.
Yeah.
It's just, but there's, again, a lot of volatility in the school district. It's a whole other topic of discussion. But yeah, local politics is kind of neat. As a Poway Democratic Club president, is your focus exclusively on local issues, or do you help out a more regional or national?
I mean, we do take positions on, regional races when we feel like they are in some way connected to Poway or Poway voters, trying to think kind of what recently, so the school board is a good example. We did take a position on Poway Unified School Board District, not only Area E, which is in Poway, but Area A, which is the seat that was left open after Darshana Patel, ran and won her election for state assembly. So we will occasionally do things like that because, Poway Unified School District affects Poway residents and Poway citizens and students. We also will take a look at, what's going on at the state level, what's going on at the state assembly. And then, in presidential elections, we obviously are rooting for our, Democratic candidates. We'd like to see them, continue to win. But I think we're not focusing exclusively on the national level. I think, the local level has been one of my priorities as president of the club, is really to make sure that residents and our members and, just Democrats and Poway in general really know what's happening locally, because that's where the change actually happens, the change you can actually make, right? It's right there. I mean, we get so tied up thinking, and upset and outraged about national politics. Well, you want to do something, look locally, right? I mean, if you're concerned about climate change, ask yourself why the city of Poway has no climate action plan, and I think is the only jurisdiction in the county of San Diego without a climate action plan, right? You can do something about that as a citizen here in Poway. If you would like to see some more competition in electricity rates. Ask yourself why the city of Poway hasn't looked into community choice energy as an option, on your energy bills. So there's lots of things like that I think that people can do locally, and so that's one of my goals as president.
Yeah, I think it's good that you're very local specific, because there's a lot of noise about all the national stuff, but the local stuff needs focus and attention.
Yeah.
And again, I love your approach.
Thanks.
Okay, and I may agree with you or disagree with you on the issues, but I just like the fact that we could have a calm conversation about politics, and it's a good conversation. Because usually this is taboo discussion,
Right.
at dinner parties or whatever. But you have an approach that is very welcoming, and not just like a hardcore, leftist, progressive, Democrat, whatever label you want to put on it. You speak to independents and to Republicans as well, and I think that's cool.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I think it doesn't help us when we go into silos, right? I mean, it doesn't really help us when we have these kind of litmus tests on issues where there is some area for debate and, area for new facts if things haven't been fully sorted out or decided yet. And there's a lot of those areas at, local levels. And so, yeah, I like to see there be more people involved and active in politics as well, especially at the local level. And again, that's not going to happen if it's just people yelling at each other all the time.
There's enough of that on social media. There's people people blocking people on social media. It's crazy out there. Yeah. It's the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
Are you noticing that the Poway Democratic Club membership numbers are going up?
Yeah. I mean, there's sort of these cyclical rise and dips around presidential elections, but we have sort of consistently seen numbers start to grow. I mean, the last several meetings that we've had, we have packed the room, which is, even after the election is surprising to come in and have a packed room,
Nice.
and new people, showing up, people hearing about us. We've been making a concerted effort to get the word out about us, ourselves, and our, endorsed candidates and our supported candidates. We put out ads on, social media recently, in the last election.
I noticed those. That's good. Good for you guys.
Yeah. I mean, that's what everyone else is doing, right? That's what the other big PACs are doing, Lincoln Club, the county parties, the, Police Officers Association. And so, this is a way for us to make sure that we are keeping our voice, strong and loud out there as well. And I think it's paying off. I think more and more people in Poway recognize that there is an organization that is here to help them, know what's going on in local politics, to help them see the issues, help them meet candidates, meet elected officials, and just generally get involved. Because a lot of people just want to do something,
right?
Right? Like, they're if they're upset, right? They see something going on Poway Road or whatever, and they get upset. They want to know, where do I go to do something? And so we're there to help them figure that out.
Right on. Yeah, you can point them in all the right directions, because there's so many. I mean, there's a lot of service groups in Poway too that are doing great work. Even kind of outside of the scope of politics. But this is great. This conversation is wonderful.
Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed it. If we're wrapping up, I mean,
we're not. I mean, we can go for as long as you like, but where do you want to go?
Well, are there any questions or comments from people?
Well, we get a whole bunch here from Mike Devine. He's like posted like 15 messages.
He's done working out, so he's got.
Yeah, he has. And let me see if I can just kind of pick a few here. We're probably not going to go through all of them. He says here, Mike Devine, those Democrats are still here. And just like the whack job on Twin Peaks, the whack jobs were on Poway Road as well. Same. Mike's a pretty hardcore, Trump supporter. So he's kind of fun to listen to. He's always got something to say for sure. But we had some polite people jumping in. So if you're still watching, we got a live stream audience right now. If you have a question or comment for Amit Asaravala, just drop it in the live chat on YouTube, Facebook, or on X, and we'll get you involved. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else we got here from Mike Devine? Mike, just here he is talking about the elections, the counting and how long it takes to count the votes. He goes, doing it right takes 1 day. Doing it wrong takes 30 days.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that, with what happened 4 years ago, at the national level, with these kind of, independent Trump-aligned groups coming out and accusing voter registrars of, messing with ballots and kind of these conspiracy theories that you talked about. A lot of voter registrars were much more careful, not only around like physical security, but just making sure that it was an airtight process. Like there was no room for question or, no place where somebody could say, oh, well, that there wasn't a chain of custody, of that box of ballots to the time that you counted them. So therefore those must all be invalidated. So that may have played into some of the extra time that it took to count all these ballots.
I think that's true. I think they were trying to prove that everything was above board, and then it took longer, but it's part of politics is a slow churning machine,
Yeah, right, right.
So what do you see in Poway's future? I mean, can you kind of see some things coming?
Right. I think that's a really interesting question. I think that oftentimes a lot of people kind of feel like Poway is this kind of just stable, sleepy place, right? Especially if you're, and I get it, right? You're a busy parent, you're trying to raise your kids, you're trying to, you get your job, you come back, you're trying to spend time with your spouse and your family. Paying attention to all the things that are going on is actually kind of hard to do.
Yeah.
And so as long as, I think people can always talk about the roads being smooth and, as long as there's not an apartment building going up right next door to your backyard, you're sort of happy with, how things are going for the most part. But I don't think people realize like how much change is taking place and kind of, we're in this sort of point now where, Poway can't just be stable. It's not even stable is not the right word. It can't be stagnant, right? The pressure to build housing, right, of all types, is very strong. And like I was saying earlier, there's a need for it. And if we're concerned about where our kids, where our firefighters and police officers and the people who work at the grocery stores and service are going to live, we need to find ways to make that housing happen, right? Which means development. So that's all going to happen whether people like it or not. The question is, how does that happen?
Right.
And so, what I see in store for Poway, it can go in one of two directions, right? It can either, a city council that doesn't push back and require developers to do the work to figure out how to make their projects fit in with what a vision, a unified vision of Poway should be. If the city council is not that, you're going to have kind of this hodgepodge of random stuff, and it's not going to feel great. And you're going to try to walk down Poway Road. It's not going to be walkable at all, ever. And that vision is just never going to be achieved, right? If you have a city council that does kind of push on that, right? Not a city council that's completely opposed to all development, but just says, hey, hold on a second. Like, why are we asking for this conditional use permit again? Or, why are we giving you this and what are we getting in return? Or why are our in lieu fees for, why are we allowing developers to get out of building affordable housing for $500 a unit when next door in the city of San Diego, it can end up amounting to $15,000 to $19,000 per unit, right? Mm-hmm. Which is money that should be coming back to the city. Like, if we have city council members who just are questioning that, rather than just saying, yeah, it's fine. That's money in developers' pockets. Mm-hmm. We can actually, we'll see one of two things happen, right? We can actually see a unified vision for Poway that, like I was saying earlier, like the Midland Road, model that kind of looks cool, that people enjoy being in and spending time in and taking their family to on a Saturday and walking around shops and having a beer at Hop Stop or whatever, right? And then going to, the park. If we want that, we got to have city council members that actually push back. And so we'll see what happens.
See, I've always contended Poway has an identity crisis because we like to think we're the city in the country, and that applied many decades ago. Yeah. But we're like a suburban community now, and we're building radically. Yeah. So it's like it doesn't match. Reality and the motto don't match. And I think that's another part of maybe the disconnection people are feeling.
It might be for sure. I mean, no doubt there are people who have lived in Poway a very long time who move here, and they loved the horse stables and, love seeing horses go down Espola and Twin Peaks, and um, love the open space. And there are people who've moved here recently, right? They moved into these new developments that we're building, that moved in not necessarily for that country vibe, but for the school district, for some of the new housing, for whatever it is, right? The parks, or the kind of just the fact that they could have a nice, quiet, safe community to raise their family in, and that, those two different things. I think it's unfortunate that sometimes they're sort of in contrast, and even sometimes kind of played off each other by, whatever it is, right? People, in the community who want to try to create this one or the other dichotomy.
Mm-hmm.
You can find ways to satisfy both, I mean, unless you're somebody who is just like, I liked it the way it looked in 1980. And I'm not going to accept anything else, right? Which, well, I'm sorry, but that's not going to exist anymore.
Right.
That's the nature of all cities that are growing and changing, right? I mean, if your city didn't grow and change, it becomes stagnant. I mean, it would, you wouldn't have businesses anymore that were serving you. People would move out. But can you find a way not to change the city? Can you find a way not to do that sort of starts to devalue people's investments, right? In their property? Can you do that in a way that creates pride, right? Like people go, oh, that's a really cool thing that we're building here. I love that. I can't wait to take my kids down there. And that's, to me, that's the question, right? If you can find those right projects, the enthusiasm, you'll start to see people kind of marry those two things, the city and the country.
Mm-hmm.
That's my hope, at least.
I remember John Mullins said that Poway Road is the city part of the city and the country. What do you think of that?
I think that's true to a lot of extent, right? I think there was a deliberate effort by city planners, early on, to say, okay, like this part of Poway is going to be very large rural homes. This part of Poway is going to be just where the businesses are, right? We're going to line them all up and put them in the same area. For better or for worse. I mean, it's kind of an old school suburban development model that we're starting to see has problems as cities grow, because it does lead to traffic, right? I mean, if I want to go get a jug of milk because I'm running low, I live in North Poway, I got to go drive 10 minutes in either direction, and so that creates traffic, that creates a load on the roads, environmental problems, right? If you had a city that was planned out in a way where things were, there was a place for me to go get a jug of milk, it didn't require getting in my car and driving, you'd have a more of a neighborhood community feel, right? You might even run into people on my way down to the shop to grab some milk, might even chat with the store owner a bit, right? I mean, and so I think these are sort of in my mind, my interpretation, kind of that smaller town country feel that could help create some enthusiasm around the development in Poway if we were to see more things like that, rather than let's put in another big box store in one concentrated area downtown, right?
It's interesting because you go to a bigger city and there's like a neighborhood grocery store, which is difficult in Poway.
Yeah,
I mean, even for us, like the closest grocery store is Sprouts. And that's, that's probably be like a 20-minute walk, it's doable, but late at night in the dark and, it's tough.
Yeah.
The vision though, I think for the Poway Road specific plan, the original thought was that it was going to be walkable.
Yeah.
I remember way back, they were thinking of having it as diagonal parking, kind of like Midland Road along Poway Road, where there was a lot like a downtown El Cajon, with outdoor seating and cafes and that sort of thing. And that kind of went out the wayside, but we really haven't seen what kind of local businesses are going to be embedded in those new developments yet, have we?
I don't think so. I mean, I know there's, like a realtor has set up shop, or maybe a mortgage broker or something like that has set up shop in one of them. but yeah, we haven't seen kind of that vision. And part of that, I think, is, the cornerstone of that whole area is currently kind of a gaping hole closed off, on Poway Road there, because the project fell through when they hit groundwater and, the company went bankrupt. That's the Commons project down there in Poway Road that was supposed to be sort of that.
No, it was the Outpost.
Oh, it's the Outpost. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Not
Not Commons. You're right. Outpost.
Yeah, but they're building there again. There's new construction going on, right?
That's right. I think there is a company that has started doing something there. I don't know what the result's going to be yet. I haven't looked into it deeply, but yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed that we see that change, right?
We got some more comments here, so I want to get everyone involved, and let's go here to where is it? To Hiram with the clever Hiram Soto. He says, "Thank you, Amit and John, for a great convo. John, I really appreciated the comment about 4 council members who don't live in District 1 voting on who should represent District 1. We need a special election."
Yeah, that's the ideal outcome, right? A special election, kind of going back to our initial conversation here, is allowing residents to have a say in who the representative is, right, in that district. That is what we want, and if we can't have that now, then, a consolation prize, if you will, would be ensuring that seat is an open race in 2026 and not somebody who is an appointed incumbent who's highly likely to win just based on name recognition of being an incumbent, right? So, city council members, if you're out there listening, if this word gets out to you, like this is what the community largely wants and needs, and so trying to push through an appointment of somebody who's almost kind of preordained is really not listening to the voices of the voters.
Yeah. I mean, local elections should be elections, not appointments.
Absolutely.
Go here to John Carson, another gentleman who ran for office a number of cycles ago. He says, "Amit, what would an environmental plan for the city look like for you?"
I appreciate that question, John. Thanks. So if you look at the environmental plans of other cities, basically what they do is they lay out your city's calculated greenhouse gas emissions totals, right? You take into account whatever industries in the city, whatever businesses, city government, residents, vehicles, traffic. And you can actually, Sandag has a pretty good model, and you can actually try to come up with a number of what your city produces on average. And what you want to do is basically say, what is our target for this? And, what are we trying to get to? If we want to be, if we want to be environmentally responsible, if we want to do our part, just like every other jurisdiction has to do its part to help reduce greenhouse gases, which we know are scientifically proven to be causing, climate change and catastrophic weather events, right? I mean, that's not a question anymore. If we agree on this, we need to do something about it. We can't just sit back and say, let everybody else do all the work, and we're just going to sit here and do nothing about it. So if we want to play our part, we set a goal, we set a target. And then our plan outlines ways to achieve that target. And then this is a chance for us as a city to say, all right, here are ways that we want to achieve that target in ways that are palatable to us, that we can do, that are benefits to the community, rather than getting to a point where it's an emergency and we don't have a choice anymore in how we do that. And so there are things like electrification of more city buildings. Does the city invest in putting in more charging for electric vehicles in public spots? Do we, look at electric buses? Do we look at solar panels, in city managed solar panels on large areas? There are some cities that are looking at solar panels on top of their water reservoirs. Do you even look into there was years ago, a representative from Ramona's water district came to Poway and talked about the possibility of doing a pipe between the two reservoirs, Ramona and Poway, and using this. There are now plans. There are now ideas on how to do two reservoirs at two different levels to store electricity, store energy, right?
Oh, yeah,
By
yeah,
using
yeah.
solar to raise a level at one time and then running it back down and running, a generator or turbine, at night. And we're set up for something like that, right? To
Yeah.
at least look into it. So that's the sort of stuff that a plan starts to take into account, right? To say, okay, let's look at all these different ideas out there. We can actually put numbers on how much, a reduction we would get, and let's put them together and let's look at the costs and say, are these costs palatable, and how are we going to get there, and how are we going to do our part?
Well, the city is already doing some stuff, right? I mean, I know the city has solar panels
Mhm.
powering some buildings. I don't know
Yeah.
to what extent. Um, I know. I remember they were putting in LED lighting along some of the street
Yeah.
lights.
Yeah.
You think that you could at least check a box on a climate action plan on what you're already doing. It may not be as
Yeah.
robust as some other
Right.
city plan,
Right.
but is your sense that we're not doing it because of leadership on the city council? And is there like an objection to a green agenda, or what is it?
Well, this may be a partisan approach, right? But I do think that there's probably ideology playing into that a little bit, right? I remember back when Dave Grush was on council, he and I sat and talked about this for a while. And, um, I remember around that time, there was a town hall, and, council members, candidates were asked specifically about like climate change. And there really were not a lot of ideas and not a lot of discussion at that time about like Poway's role in working to help everyone prevent, runaway climate change. I think the conversation went towards really like fire, which, well,
Mhm.
catastrophic wildfires are a part of what's happening. But I think it kind of went down to just, well, how do we put fire mitigation in place, and how do we make sure that our firefighters have the best tools, which are not bad things, of course, but those are sort of after the fact. Um, so, yeah, I mean, I think that there's probably, some resistance to treating it like an emergency, or treating it like a critical issue. I think that there's um, resistance to wanting to spend money on a solution, right? And maybe a belief that there's not much that we can do as a city. Like, you every now and then, right, we'll hear someone say, you know, if I spend all this money and we reduce our emissions, China or India are just going to, whatever, burn coal, and therefore, why does it matter, right? Like,
Mhm.
all I've done is hurt myself. Um, which, you know, that's almost like a philosophical argument, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
there's, if we all play our part, we can achieve something. If we all believe that, I don't want to be a part of that because it hurts me, then we're going to achieve nothing. Right?
Well, you think that they could justify some of it strictly on a cost savings basis.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
cutting out SDG&E, doing more solar,
Yeah.
city vehicles being charging. I mean, I'm a big EV advocate,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of EV drivers here in Poway. I mean, we have a story we can tell. We may not be like a liberal enclave that wants to hug every tree, but I think there's a story that could be told, and
Yeah.
I think there's a plan that could be made
Right.
that would work. And frankly, I don't know, would the city even get financial benefit from federal or state sources?
I believe so. Yeah. I think, not only like Sandag locally, but, I would think that the federal government and state of California makes available grants to help cities do some of these, climate related actions, or to put in place, different efforts. And so, there are grants out there. There are grants that are available, and the city leaves them on the table if it's not interested in going down this route.
But the money from those grants comes from us.
That's true. It's our money,
It's
right?
Poway money,
Right.
and so if it's on the table, they should be
Yeah.
taking it, in my
Yeah.
opinion. You
Yeah.
got to respond to the incentive structure. I mean, we can discuss the political argument, but if there's money on the table, they'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point about like, there are things that we're doing already. Right.
Yeah.
And there are cities out there that have kind of put together, they're sometimes, kind of derided as weak plans because they don't really have any teeth to them, but they do take into account a lot of the things the cities are already doing as part of their emissions plan. And I don't think that that's a bad thing, as long as there are some stronger goals and efforts that, so we're not just kind of sitting on our laurels saying, we've done all we can, we're good. But like, look at all we've done, look at the reduction we're going to see, and hey, we're going to push that a little bit further, and here's the reduction we're going to get to. Here's what we're committing to, to be good citizens along with the rest of the county and really the rest of the state that is all doing their part.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, think about how many private homes have solar panels. I mean, you could just add them up, and you have some pretty interesting data to go over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I want to ask you your comments about Pomerado Road and the digging up, the constant churn of infrastructure being buried under the ground. Are we done with that? Is there more coming? Why is it always construction going on all the time?
Down Pomerado specifically, so I'm not maybe up to date on all the construction going on there, but correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't a lot of that replacing a gas line that was out of date, and
that was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But they're still digging. They're still. I mean, I would imagine, is it like, if it's not gas, it might be it's water or sewage or electrical or fiber optic or something.
Right.
But it just seems it's like never ending. And every different agency is involved. It's not just the city of Poway. It's like SDG&E and someone else.
Yeah. I don't know kind of what all is taking place down that road. I mean, the gas line, I know, that's a big deal. And it's important, right? We don't want to have a gas explosion here the way that some cities, throughout the United States have had, in recent years. But keeping a city up to date takes work, unfortunately. What you hope for is that, kind of bringing this back to like the city council, right? You hope that the city staff, guided by the city council, is doing its best to keep the impact on residents to a minimum, right? You hope that they're aware of what construction is going to be taking place and looking at things like, hey, what hours, what days, are there other events happening? And that kind of reminds me of like several years back when there was a bunch of construction, taking place down Aspola Road between Poway High School and Twin Peaks Road. There was this construction happening on the first day of school. And I mean, school buses were stuck in this for hours, I think. Like people, kids were stuck on the bus late to their first day of school. Parents were just, tried to drop their kids off and go to work, and were just sitting in traffic. And, this was a problem with not coordinating and saying to these agencies, to whatever, whatever amount they're responsive to that, and saying, hey, look, our schools are starting this week. There's going to be a whole lot more cars on the road than you expected. Like, is there some way to change your working hours so it's not right during peak commute time on this day or this first week? So that's what I would love to see, is an active and engaged, city staff and council driving that and saying, hey, how do we get the word out to residents? How do we get the word out about changing, your route if there's going to be construction on Pomerado Road on this day or whatever it is? Right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll say this: the end result of Spola there is nice.
Oh yeah,
with that kind of decomposed granite sidewalk and the rope fencing.
Yeah.
But I remember they had some problems with that project with a contractor, and then they reneged and they had to get a new contractor. So there were certain challenges with it.
Oh yeah. And challenges, I think, when they began work, right, as they started digging up, they were finding things that were not laid out according to plans that they had, and having to change course because of that. But it is a nice result.
Okay, we got a couple more comments here. Let's see. It's John Carson, I think, he's got some more to say here. And where is the comment? Here it is. Poway is dusty here in District 1. Air quality in the summer is less than desirable. And he goes on to say, radical construction is a great comment.
That's interesting about being dusty in D1. That's the first time I've heard that feedback. So, that's the kind of thing where I think if a resident brings that up, I would love to see a relationship with, usually your council member who says, okay, well, yeah, let me look into that for you. Let me talk to staff. Let me find out, what they're seeing, or if there's some way for us to measure that and find out why that is. And maybe it's because of construction, and maybe, there needs to be a better effort to keep down the construction dust and debris. Maybe it's from, who knows, the clearing of brush, or, the clearing of pads for new development, for housing, whatever it is, right? But you want to have you want to know that somebody heard you and is looking into that when you bring up a concern like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never really even thought about this issue in Poway. You know,
Yeah.
generally it's pretty clean air. I mean, relatively speaking. But it must be the construction dust and everything.
Yeah.
You know, speaking of construction, what's your take on these homes that are being built along Twin Peaks, like along the ridge line? That's kind of got some people in town a little bit upset.
Let me make sure I'm kind of understanding the exact development there. Is
Because
there
like if you're going down, let's say Pomerado Road by the hospital, and you look east at the top of the hill, there are some new homes that are
Coming
going
up
up there. And there's actually a small development kind of halfway up the hill near the intersection of Twin Peaks and Pomerado, sort of, kind of. But it's mainly the construction along the top of the, is it still Twin Peaks? It's like, it's the north-south part of the hill. But there's some people that are really angry seeing that kind of construction visible.
Yeah, I mean, it raises the question of like what ridge lines in Poway are protected. What do we consider to be part of our natural resources and beauty of the city and the things that make Poway Poway? And this is kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about, like, you know, you asked about, you know, where does Poway go from here in the next several years, and you know, what's the future of Poway? And I think we can continue to, you know, allow development on ridge lines, or find a way to limit that. Now, in some cases, it's private property, and it's always been private property, and you know, there's not going to be a lot of you can do about that, you know, as a city, right? And that's something you're going to have to accept, I think, you know, where that happens. But there are places, right, especially when it comes to like commercial buildings, not necessarily residential. You know, going back to the Amazon, you know, warehouse on the ridgeline, that kind of seemed to pop up overnight because it was like, you know, prefab walls and stuff.
Yeah, the tilt ups.
Yeah. You know, things like that really should have been opposed by city staff and changed. And there should have been, you know, if there's no way to prevent that building from being that close to that ridgeline and being visible from down below, then a requirement that the colors of the building blend in with the surroundings, or requirements that there are plantings of sycamores or you know, other kind of more native trees up along the, you know, to hide that, right? So there are, you know, a handful of tools that we have at our disposal from being very strict about codes to finding a middle ground, saying, okay, you know, if you're going to build that house there, then we're going to have to ask you to blend that in, right? Have you been to Sedona, Arizona?
Oh yeah.
Beautiful, right?
Yes.
And they have very, very strict codes. It's a, you know, Republican town, I think, but very strict codes on what you can build. In fact, I think the kind of story about the McDonald's there is that it's one of the only McDonald's that doesn't have yellow arches, because the city didn't allow bright yellow as a primary color on the building. So they have teal arches, which blends in with their color palette.
But that's going too far, don't you think?
I don't think Poway could do that, or even at this point, you know, should try to. But that my point is that there are ways to find compromises.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And we should be looking for those. Right. It's not always just, is there a house that can be built anywhere, and a building that can be built anywhere, and no, you can't build anything, we're completely opposed. Right. And so, you know, if we can find that compromise, and especially our ridge lines, because I do kind of believe that being able to see the hills is a beautiful part of Poway. You know, I remember when I moved back to Poway, I think it was back 9 years ago, you know, driving down Twin Peaks and seeing, you know, Mount Woodson driving down Poway Road towards, you know, Ramona, seeing Mount Woodson and the clouds and the hills, and just thinking, you know, what a beautiful place that we live in. You know, it would be too bad if you couldn't see that anymore, and all we saw were just kind of buildings and houses everywhere, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, imagine if you were to go into the time machine, you know, 100 years ago, you know, people are probably saying the same thing, you know, this is a wonderful place to live. And now, oh my God, they're building some houses on Garden Road. And, you know, so it seems like this is a common challenge in local communities as they grow. And to your point, it's, if you stagnate, then things really start to break down. You have to accept a certain level of progress, right?
Right.
And especially as populations are surging in San Diego County.
Yeah. But not only and I talked about housing quite a bit, but I mean, I think we would all love to see, fun restaurants that are closer to us, right?
Yeah, of course.
You want to go out, you shouldn't need to go drive, whatever it is, downtown or Del Mar or wherever you go, and there are some, don't get me wrong, there are some really great restaurants in Poway, but creating a place where people congregate and shop and walk and enjoy their time is critical to being able to get that sort of development in. And it's sort of a kind of a circular project, right? Catch 22, like what comes first.
Right.
But that's the kind of development that we need to be encouraging, responsibly, of course, but we got to have something. Right.
Now there's talk of putting in more housing in the kind of in between community and, is it the Salvation Army or is it Goodwill? Where that they used to have a wood, wood, and they had the rental for the heavy equipment.
Right.
They're talking about putting housing there now.
Okay. Yeah.
And is there going to be, is that going to make it more walkable, or is it going to be more parking garages and condos, and you still got to walk, 3 blocks away to go, Stater Brothers.
Right. And so that's, I'm not sure, what in the Poway Road specific plan is designated for that area and what's allowed in that area. However, if it's in keeping with sort of the general concept of and vision of that sort of downtown walkable area, then you want to see the city saying, okay, we'd love for you to build here as long as you're providing these kind of, community benefits, this, beautiful sidewalk that people can walk down with trees and, allowing there to be whatever, small shops on the bottom floor that people want to stop in as they walk down. And if you give that up easily and you say, okay, fine, you know what, that was a nice concept, but go ahead and build your apartments all the way down to the bottom floor. And okay, fine, if you can build an extra 10 units by pushing out your building into that sidewalk and making it just a 5-foot sidewalk, go ahead. You start giving up that vision of Poway, and you're left with a place that people only go to if they live there, or they're trying to get past it because they're trying to get to the freeway, right? And that's not good for business either, right? That's not good for tax revenues, because the more people spend time in our businesses and spend time, shopping, and we have tax revenue coming in, that's what creates a vibrant economy for the city of Poway.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think about the way the city was planned, because even a lot of the construction along Poway Road was done before the city was incorporated. And that's why like Kaminsky's and a bunch of those buildings are like offset on an angle when you're driving down Poway Road, which is really odd. I mean, it'd be great to have a lot more restaurants, a lot more things here, but they're going to put in that Cane's right on Poway Road. When's that going to start? They're already fencing that off, right?
Yeah. And so now we're getting into like stuff that I don't have, I don't keep good track of, like, that part of it. But, I think it's great to see that restaurants, of any kind, even if they're chains, still want to come in to Poway, right? I think that would be a kind of a canary in the coal mine if you couldn't get, anybody that wanted to move in, and we're seeing a lot of empty spaces in Poway. So, there's still activity, which is good. But, how do we attract, even independent restaurants and small businesses and things that aren't chains? I think that'd be a great question.
John Carson goes on to say, Poway is a food desert. I mean, in parts of Poway, it does seem that way.
It does. But, there are these kind of like gems tucked into funny places you don't expect. I don't know if you've been to Tong Sake House.
Oh, that's a good place.
That's one of the best places. I give a shout out to them. I was really worried during COVID that things were going to go south for Tong, like many other local businesses, but thankfully they I think with the change of ownership have survived, and I love going there. So I think if we can continue just to attract and retain those sorts of businesses and help them in any way, walkability being one of those ways, we'll do good as a city.
Do you ever follow a guy on social media? His handle is the Poway Urbanist.
Yeah, I've heard of him. Or that social media handle. Yeah.
And he's very he or she is very interesting, because they talk about how cities do a lot of urban or suburban planning. And I remember one of the big points he brought up was that in most European cities, there are streets and there are roads.
Right.
And streets are like, 25 mile an hour, and
Right.
roads are like 45, 55
Right.
miles an hour. But in California, we have stroads.
Right.
And I think that's what Poway Road is.
Right. Yeah. So this is I think a concept kind of brought up and talked a lot about an organization called Strong Towns. It's, kind of I think it was a former like city engineer who started this group. And so I think like the Poway Urbanist is a member of Strong Towns. Now that I'm kind of remembering this all. But yeah, the concept of a stroad, Poway Road is the classic example of a stroad, right? You've got a lot of people who need a road and just want to get through, and they just want to get to the freeway, right? And to them, it's very frustrating to see more development, more activity on Poway Road, because it impedes what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a lot of people who have business that they want to do and conduct and things they want to do on Poway Road, right? You want to go to the Brigantine. You want to go and, have go over and see a movie at the AMC or whatever it is, right? On Poway Road. So marrying these two things is almost impossible. You're going to have people upset on both sides. You either make it a 35 mile an hour, thoroughfare, and cars are whizzing by and nobody feels safe walking there or comfortable. It's not a fun place to be when you're standing next to cars whizzing by you. Or you slow things down, you do these diagonal parking spots, and it's like Midland Road, which is a good example of a street with businesses on both sides and people walking and enjoying it. And then the people who want to try to get through are really upset because everything has come to a standstill. I think Scripps Poway Parkway was supposed to be a solution, right? Try to get the road people off of Poway Road.
And Twin Peaks, I think, could fit that model too.
Yeah.
So why not make Poway Road a street?
Yeah.
Call it Poway Street.
Yeah. I think, you'd have to listen to voices from like communities like Garden Road, right? Longstanding communities. What do they need? They need to be able to get to the freeway as well.
There's a back exit there to Scripps Poway, right, just south of Garden Road.
Yeah.
Imagine if they opened that up.
Yeah. Right.
I think it's for emergency vehicles only, though.
I think so. Yeah. Or, fire vehicles. Yeah. So, I think we would have to take a look at that. But I think the point about stroads is a really good one. And that's one that it's resonated with me. I do kind of follow Strong Towns a bit, and I like their ideas because it's very nonpartisan. And it talks a lot about like, why are there cities that we love, right? I mean, we spend thousands of dollars to go visit, right? Paris and London and Rome, and kind of how have these cities become the cities that they are? And they're rarely results of separating things out and saying, here's all the houses and here's all the businesses.
Yeah. And
then up here on this hill is where you go do your work. But none of these things are connected. There is a better option, and it's not. And I'm sure some of the people out there right now are just thinking, but I don't want a Safeway or a Sprouts right next to my house. Like I'm not,
right.
No, it's not a all or nothing, right? There's these better options of, and the farm, if there were small businesses, if there was a small local cafe that was, set up shop there, run by a local business owner, that would be so wonderful. I remember my daughter when we were talking about the farm and that plan, she was super excited. She's like, is there going to be a cafe, like a public cafe? Like I would love to ride my bike down there and meet my friends and, have a boba or something after school.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. And I think if you shared that vision with the majority of people who live around there in North Poway, like they would be like, yeah, that sounds great. So let's see that. Let's hear more discussion of that and not just here's this big, multinational company that wants to set up a big box here. Right. And then it just becomes a fight over that over and over.
Yeah. I agree with you. The Stroads angle is nonpartisan, although they always use European cities as an example, and that's going to, tweak a few people in America, for sure. But they make really sound points about it. And then when I look at the chaos, and we always say we don't want Poway to turn into Mira Mesa, right? Well, Mira Mesa Road or Boulevard is another Stroad.
Yeah.
And that's just a disaster.
Yeah. 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 This is a result of kind of old suburban planning that, I don't know if they just didn't have the foresight to think about, what's going to happen 40 years down the line, or, even 60 years down the line. But lots of suburbs throughout America are facing this problem right now and trying to fix it. And it is hard. It's a hard thing to fix, right?
Yeah.
And so
Because you have entrenched interests that have been here for decades and they don't want change, or
Yeah.
very little change.
Yeah. And you have millions of dollars of investment and habits and
Yeah.
people who've made decisions based on the way one thing works and looks, right?
Right.
But I think starting small is kind of what tends to be the route that makes the most sense to me, is like, start small. You encourage local businesses, let them, let there be some place in North Poway for somebody to spend some money. I mean, right? I mean, if you think about like where in this whole part of Poway, would you go to, and spend $1? You mentioned like going to Sprouts, you're leaving the city of Poway. You're going and spending your money in the city of San Diego.
Right. Sure.
Right. I mean, I know that there's a restaurant down in Madeiras, but, I think it's got a once in a while sort of thing.
Yeah.
Imagine if there was a place for, students of Poway High School to go get lunch, to go hang out after school, to, I mean, just you create a community that way. You don't build a strong community when everybody gets in the car, drives to a spot, gets in the car, drives home, and there's no interaction, nothing, right?
But I think that was the original design with Prop FF, was to keep North Poway rural, to not have commercial buildings here. Yeah. And that was the interesting angle to this whole story, because this was a proposal to, Measure H, to put more commercial property in North Poway. Yeah. But, obviously people objected to it for a lot of different reasons. But in the end, I mean, if I want to, go out and have a beer and watch a ball game, I mean, the closest place to me is Chicken Charlie's, which is also in San Diego.
Right.
Yeah.
The Prop FF thing that you mentioned, it's a little bit more, I think, nuanced, because it has to do with, right, what change can a city make? Really, what change can a city council make on its own, and what do city residents have a say in? And so I like Prop FF because it allows, again, the residents of a city to have a say, right? To have a voice. And I think what got lost with a lot of the kind of back and forth around the farm, not just Lifetime, but like the farm itself, was, it wasn't the residents basically sticking their foot in the door, sticking their noses into private property and what can a private property owner do with their property. It was, the city has set aside this thing as open space recreational, which has certain limits, right? And a golf club was within those limits. And if you want to change that, what is it that we as citizens expect in return? It's a common good, essentially, right? Like if you look at our zoning as a common good and a common responsibility, and we're giving that away, in a sense, by changing it to a different level, to higher intensity, to residential, to businesses, commercial. Are we getting back as residents something that we're happy with and proud of in doing that? Or is it simply just a giveaway and a developer makes a ton of money and, people move in and they hopefully enjoy where they moved into? But did anything, larger come out of that? Right. I would have, and hopefully I still have my fingers crossed that something larger will come out of that space where the Lifetime Fitness, was proposed to go. And we see that the development along Espola, where there's supposed to be like a community kitchen and things like that, I mean, that to me, I think will be a really good change for Poway as we start to see more, businesses kind of come in a nice, careful way into North Poway.
Do you get a sense that, you're hearing like Democrats in California, many of them are proudly saying they're YIMBYs. Yes, in my backyard.
Right.
And there's a coalition of them that are really pushing for housing development, but to your point, smart development, integration with mass transit and a lot of other things.
Yeah.
But there's also this talk that, even Vice President Harris in her campaign was saying that they were going to try to cut local red tape on zoning to allow housing to be more easily constructed because of the housing crisis.
Yeah.
So do you see a scenario where local cities are going to lose their ability to have things like Prop FF?
It's possible, but what I like about the way Californians are pushing it now is, they're asking the cities to show a housing plan and show, where they're going to meet their regional housing needs assessments. And so, if they say, okay, every city is responsible for increasing housing by so many units, by increasing affordable housing by so many units, you as a city sit down and decide where are those available opportunities for developers to build and help you meet those needs. So it does give cities some say in that. I think there tends to be a lot of like, oh, Sacramento, they put this mandate on us and now we're all stuck, and gosh, if only we could change Sacramento. But I think that the solution that's being offered at the moment is still a measured one where, if the city council could actually like get beyond their hatred of Sacramento politics and say, okay, let's seriously sit down and think about like, where are these things? Where are we okay with these things being built? Right? Where can we offer up this land and identify these places? Interestingly enough, the city, when they did turn in their housing element to the state, they were out of compliance for a number of years after they turned it in. They did not actually meet the requirements. And there were some things that felt like a shell game to me, at least as an observer. And I think that the city, needs to get called out for that. The Big Stone Lodge parcel that is kind of back in Old Poway. This is a floodplain that, one time had been talked about as being a passive park for the city of Poway, kind of deep in there. But the city offered that up on the housing element as a place to build affordable housing. It checks the box and says, okay, you've created enough space in your city for it to meet that need. But even I think Councilmember Caitlin Frank said out loud in a city council meeting, oh, we're never going to actually build there. So, to me, like I said, that feels like a shell game, to try to offer up one thing to meet your needs, but not actually have it be a buildable location.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you are willing to work within the system that we have right now, I think that we have opportunities. I think that we can have a say in what happens. I think if we don't work within that system and we don't take advantage of that now, we very well could see a scenario in the future where, somebody in the state capitol, legislators say, yeah, the cities have just continually found workarounds to this and have not built enough housing. We're going to have to further, loosen up regulation and allow housing in a way that cities no longer have control over.
Are you following much with City of San Diego and
a little bit,
because they're creating these zones like in the UTC area, and I think parts of Mira Mesa where they're going to radically increase housing.
Yeah,
I think they're going to go vertical, aren't they? Like with high rises.
Yeah, and I think the trolley system and the accessibility of that and mass transit plays a lot into that, right?
Yeah.
I think they have a much larger scale problem than we do and have to think about it in a much different way than we do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily see the future of Poway anytime soon having, large mass transit, coming in and in high rises to meet our needs that way. But we're not doing all that we can right now, I think, to meet our needs. And, I mentioned in lieu fees, for example, like we're letting developers sort of control the narrative and build what they want to build and then walk away with that extra $15,000 cash per unit in their pocket, rather than that going into a fund, housing fund to the city of Poway, that the city of Poway can then use in innovative ways to continue to, grow our housing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a proponent of just building more. I think that's what they need to do. And to your point, build in all categories, not just high-end homes, but also middle homes, starter homes. There's a lot of different philosophies and political strategies,
Yeah.
and should the in lieu fees subsidize other people? It's fascinating how there's all these different angles to it. But I just sometimes get a sense that some people just they just don't want more people coming in.
Yeah.
And it kind of plays a little bit into the whole immigration, topic as well.
Right.
People just don't want them. We don't want any more people. We're full.
Yeah. 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 I think that's true. I've heard, for years, even from city council members, like Poway's built out, period. We're done. Like we've built what we wanted to build and we're done. But again, like you can't just be in stasis, right? Things are changing around us. Even if we wanted to just put a bubble around Poway and leave it as is, everything is changing around us, and the people in Poway are changing, right? And economics are changing, and going back to, like, if we want our young folks in Poway to feel like they're welcome here, feel like they have a place here after they leave high school and want to come back, want to raise a family, there has to be a place for them to go when they come back, and it has to be affordable. It can't be $1 million and up. They're not going to make it back here. I don't know what's going on out there.
You're right.
So I think, to the people who say, I don't want any more people, I don't want any change, I just want things the way they were. I feel for that, and I have a lot of empathy for that, because change is hard, and it can be uncomfortable. But I hope that they are able to work with representatives to find those compromises, right? Look for those compromises. Find ways, find things, something that's acceptable. So, like, okay, I can agree to, those houses being built over there on that hill, within reason. And I get that there's going to be new houses there, okay. As long as it's not a 10-story high rise and a trolley station,
right?
There's got to be some middle ground, because there's, otherwise we're just all digging in our feet and we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And so you would hope that we'd have our city council will be able to foster that kind of compromise, right?
Right.
Amongst the people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I kind of have to maybe dig into the city council, or at least acknowledge, I think, kind of what has led to a lot of the resentment around city council again, to circle back to the start of our conversation. When that Amazon building warehouse went up, there wasn't even a acknowledgement by the city council that someone screwed up, right? There wasn't even an acknowledgement that yeah, that's ugly. We're sorry that, you're that house that you've owned for 30 years, you walk out your front door. Now here this is, right? With Lifetime, we talked about the city council actually was, kind of laughing at some of the residents of the city of Poway who might object to it, behind closed doors. With water rates, after the stop water order and the discovery that our clear well needed to be, completely redesigned, it was presented to the city as we're embarking on the biggest capital project that Poway's ever done. Yeah, that's really exciting for city planners. They're super thrilled to be a part of this. But the rest of us are seeing our water rates go up very steeply every single year. Part of that is because of external events, but part of that's because we're going to have to pay off I think $16 million bond to redo our water well. There's no acknowledgement from the city council that this is tough, that this is a thing that we're going to have to kind of all get through together. Here's ways that we can make it better on all of us. And no apologies, no accountability. And so I think this is what is missing right now in the city of Poway. And so, if I'm going to, end on a note of hopefulness, it is that changes, that the newcomers can change that people keep speaking up. The residents out there are asking for what they want and paying attention and getting news from sources like you, and hearing about what's going on in the city, and can make some positive change in that relationship.
Well, I think we're going to get Tony Blaine. We're going to get Jenny. Is it Maeda or Maida?
I was saying Maeda, but I'm not
I
sure.
think it must be
Okay.
Maeda.
Okay.
Forgive me if I'm pronouncing it
Yeah.
incorrectly. So we're going to have Tony and Jenny and then someone else to replace Brian Pepin.
Yeah.
So things are changing in Poway.
They are. I mean, that person who replaces Pepin, may just be kind of an establishment pick. We'll have to wait and see, right? And you've got to believe that Voss, and it'd really be like Voss and DeHoff and whoever else that they choose, right, are probably going to be working together to maintain a majority on the council. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, there's real opportunity, and the fact that this election turned out the way it did means that the next election is most likely to continue in that direction. And we'll see District 1 and District 3 and the mayor's race just in 2 years. And it's going to be
it's going to be fun.
It's going to be really interesting to see. And candidates, get out there and start making yourself known. Leaders in the community, like there are three races coming up in 2 years, and it happens fast.
Yeah. And I'm in District 3, so yeah, my district will be coming up too. Hey, if people want to get involved in the Poway Democratic Club, how do they contact you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So PowayDemocraticClub.org is our website, and you can if you just want to kind of see what's going on, you can join the mailing list, and you hear about our upcoming meetings. And if you want to become a full-fledged member, you can also join that way. Full-fledged members give you like voting benefits in things like endorsements. And so, we're chartered by the San Diego County Democratic Party. We're not a party ourselves, or we're not like a part of the San Diego County Democratic Party, but being chartered by them means as long as we follow, certain bylaws that they've set forth and like how we do endorsements, they will actually take into consideration like our endorsements. And so this is to me, politics in action, right? Like that door hanger of endorsements that you get, that a lot of people get, they're often by our volunteers. Those endorsements, happen not in a closed, room by just a handful of people that say that's going to be our candidate. At least in the Democratic Party, it comes from the ground up, from people like the Poway Democratic Club. Residents of Poway say, hey, we really like what David Chang is saying for school board. We want to endorse him. And then, we take that up to the city level, the county level, and advocate for David Chang to get on that door hanger and to be the supported endorsed candidate. Same with like Vanessa Springett, which we did. We said, okay, we know that she's not a Democrat, but we have a lot of things in common, and we like the way that she works, and we think she'd be great for the city. Let's support her.
I like that you did that, because some would be partisan only, right? If you're not a Democrat, we're not going to support you.
Yeah.
You considered an independent, and I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it's if there were a strong Democrat in the race, I think obviously we would want to support that Democrat.
Yeah.
But in this case, right, we took a look at who's running, and we reached out to Vanessa and talked to her, and I was really pleasantly surprised, and just kind of meeting her and learning about her background and kind of what she felt could be changed and improved on city council, and members agreed, and they met with her, and it wasn't a top-down decision where we said to members, hey, we're all coming in behind Vanessa Springett. She had an opportunity to speak to members, and they overwhelmingly said, yeah, we're happy to support her. And that's the way that we work. We go kind of bottom up, and I encourage people to get involved.
Vanessa Springett, maybe dark horse candidate for Poway mayor in 2 years.
I mean, we'll see what happens in District 2. Yeah, like I said, I mean, Tony Blaine has come in very strong. We didn't talk about, kind of some of the actions that city council is trying to put in place.
Yeah. It's like ethics issues, right?
Exactly right. Maybe we'll take a couple extra minutes if you have them. I know we've gone like very long here.
We're going 2 hours and 15 minutes.
It goes so fast talking with you, John. Like it's, and I think everybody who comes and talks to you feels this way, right? I think everybody comes in and is like, okay, we got an hour. And then 3 hours later, they're like, wait, where did the time go?
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's touch on that.
Yeah. I think because Tony Blaine has come out very strong and has come out saying like, I'm gonna, ask for the resignation of the city manager and city attorney, and we're gonna put through recalls of other people on council, and has sent emails to many people, has directly gone to members on city staff. it seems like the staff and the council are trying to create some guardrails here, so that things don't go, completely, I guess, off the rails. One of the things being that I know the city manager has said, council members need to come through him. They shouldn't be going directly to other staff members below, at lower levels.
Yeah.
Just as a way to keep city staff operating without constantly being distracted by city council. Now, I think there's pros and cons to that. And so that remains to be seen if that works out, for the good, or if that just kind of creates a gatekeeper. It puts a bit more power in the city manager's hands. But then again, that is the city council's job, is basically oversight of the city manager, right? I mean, it's not the city council's job, I think, to some people's surprise, that, to be running all of city of Poway. It's the city council's job to provide oversight and direction to the city manager. And people forget that sometimes. And so, we'll see if that change makes sense. But it appears to me to be a change because of Tony Blaine coming in. And the other one, I think, is, they're passed an ethics code, kind of just based around like how city council members should conduct themselves. And I think that is also designed to try to, create a boundary on kind of what can happen in these city council meetings, so they don't go off the rails, and just kind of based on what they're seeing about Tony Blaine. So
they should have used those guardrails during that leaked private session.
That's a really interesting point that you bring up, right? There is, I think, a code of conduct that they're trying to put in place, but that they themselves seemed not to have followed just a couple years ago in this kind of behind closed door session, where they're saying things about residents and there's laughter on that audio track. They're sort of laughing and joking around. And, so will this code of conduct apply to all council members here forth? We hope so, right? We would like to see that be applied evenly, and like to see the rest of the council members, kind of work within that boundary that they set forward, and ideally maybe even apologize for their comments, right, to some of these residents if they haven't yet. So, I think that Tony Blaine has scared city council, the current member of city council. I think he has scared, or at least alarmed people on staff. And that could be, in some ways, that can sometimes be a good thing. If you say, hey, there's going to be changes. That's not just going to be a rubber stamp of everything from here forward. I'm going to question things. But it could also be, to the detriment of the operations of city council and the staff. And the question is really for Tony Blaine. It is, does he find a way to kind of channel that energy constructively to his benefit, to work with others when he needs them, to get the votes that he needs in city council? Or is it just constantly, him siloed, and, either nothing gets done or the other four work together and vote against him? And so, if he's going to retain that independence, he's going to have to find a way.
There's going to be so much more to talk about over the next couple of years. There really is. I mean, this is a time of change in Poway.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The immediate thing is we got to deal with this appointment in D1. And I sure hope that people stand up and say, if we can't have a special election, then this has to be a seat that is only an appointee that's selected with the agreement that they not run for election in 2 years, right? These are kind of the only real good options for residents.
Yeah, I agree with you on that point.
So, yeah.
Amit, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we went 2 hours, 18 minutes. That's long enough for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, longer than I expected, but I enjoyed it, and it really went fast. And so, thank you so much.
Amit, thank you very much. Okay, friends, we'll publish this. This will be the audio only podcast will be up, probably by tomorrow. And then over the next week or so, I'll be chopping this up into pieces on each of the specific topics. So you'll be looking for that content on YouTube, on John Riley Project, on my Facebook page, John Riley Project. I'm starting to post a lot of the content on X and on Blue Sky and Threads, and just look everywhere and you'll be able to get a lot of this stuff. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And Amit, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everybody who was watching and wrote in.
Okay. All right. Thanks again. We'll see you later.